But joining me now is Veterans Advocate and former RSL New South Wales President James Brown. This is in relation to the story that's getting about at the moment that's really been triggered by the Daily Telegraph, having conversations going about suicides relating to our armed forces or members of our armed forces. It's really interesting stuff and really important stuff too. James, first of all, good morning to you. What are your thoughts on that campaign that took place yesterday?
Yeah, good morning. Look, yesterday was powerful, it was gripping, and frankly it was grueling. I mean, I've heard those stories before about those young men that took their own lives, but to have 5 of their mothers sitting there and telling us in detail what that experience was like, how those tragedies unfolded and what went wrong and how the system failed their loved ones was just incredibly grueling. But it's had some impact. The meeting with the Prime Minister yesterday has kept the door open to a Royal Commission. We're starting to see support from other quarters as well. The New South Wales government backing the calls for a Royal Commission into the veterans system. So there's never been more support to actually get this system fixed and get it right for this generation and the next generation of veterans.
Yeah, James, I mean, some of that information that came out yesterday just really punches you in the heart, doesn't it? I'm wondering if there's a particular story that stood out for you. There was one of the mothers, and her name escapes me at the moment, but she talked about how her son obviously had some form of PTSD, and he was encouraged to keep marching despite the problems that he was having, but it was wearing the uniform that was a bad trigger for him, and unfortunately he ended up losing his life. It's just shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, that story from Feeneys about her son David and how some of the difficulties he had when he was reaching out for psychiatric treatment. I think the most damning thing that we were told yesterday was that when he reached out for support, he was told that there was a waiting list. He was reaching out at the end of last year. He was told there was a waiting list through till April before he could actually get the mental health treatment that he needed. And that just goes to show, whilst the government has been doing the right thing by veterans in terms of putting money into non-liability mental health care, actually accessing that mental health care is still very hard. I mean, in June, we had the Productivity Commission, the government's expert think tank, hand down a 700-page report into the veterans system. They said it's broken, it's unfair, it's complex, and it's actually causing harm, not just in need of reform, but in need of going back to the very first principles and starting again.
Yeah, the Prime Minister says he won't rule it out, which is positive when it comes to a Royal Commission. But James, should he rule it in?
Look, I think there's 2 options here. I mean, we laid out an agenda for the Prime Minister. What we're asking for really is strong and sustained leadership at the national level on veterans, and we haven't had it for a long time. So I think there's 2 ways this can go. The Prime Minister engages on this deeply. He signs up to the agenda that the Daily Telegraph has published and that others are calling for. He agrees to fully fund and implement the reforms that the Productivity Commission has suggested. Or we agree that this problem is so big and the facts really aren't known. We really don't know even how many veterans there are, and let alone what their problems are. And it needs the forensic attention and spotlight of a Royal Commission. I think those are really the only 2 options left on the table.
And James, it's not just for the soldiers as well, it's for the families, because, one of the recurring themes that comes throughout this campaign by the Daily Telegraph is that the families of the victims who are left behind are still very much carrying the burden as well.
Yeah, and that's not just for younger veterans, it's the same for older veterans. I sat down with a Vietnam tunnel rat in Western New South Wales earlier this year, and he was talking to me about how war widows, once their loved one, the veteran, dies, there's no one left to look after them. There's a whole network of family carers that really pick up the burden of our country's national security, supporting people whilst they're away, supporting them when they come back, and we've got to do a lot more for them and hear a lot more from them as well.
And what do you make of the reaction so far, James? I mean, and if they do push forward with the Royal Commission, do you believe that the public will finally understand what's going on and how bad it is, similar to the results of the Royal Commission into aged care just last week?
Yeah, and what we've seen in those Royal Commissions is the problems are often worse than you thought. I mean, veteran homelessness is a great example. A few years ago, we thought there were 3,000 homeless veterans across Australia. The Department of Veterans Affairs said, no, we think the number is 300. Well, an exhaustive and intensive study has just been completed that shows that the number is 20 times that. Almost 6,000 veterans are homeless. So I have no doubt that if we do have a Royal Commission, it will find problems we don't even know exist in the veteran support network and community, and it will no doubt find that there are a lot more problems that need to be dealt with than we're currently dealing with at the moment.
All right, James, appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for joining us.